Snow fell quietly over the deserted bus stop, each flake glowing against the street light. Grace Bennett sat in her wheelchair, the red of her dress blazing against the white drift, an old bag resting at her side. 3 hours earlier, her fiancé had branded her damaged goods. 2 hours earlier, her father had cast her out for refusing an arranged marriage. From the shadows, his bodyguard Carter kept watch, torn between duty and silence. A pickup truck slowed, then halted. Jackson Hayes stepped into the snow, his young daughter Emma watching from the window. His eyes found Grace. "Come with me," he said. Jackson Hayes was 32 years old, though the lines around his eyes suggested a man who'd lived through more years than the calendar showed. Once he'd been one of the most brilliant medical specialists in the state, his hands performing miracles in operating rooms across the country. But that was before the night his wife Sarah died on an operating table, while he stood helplessly in the hallway outside, banned from the surgery by hospital protocol. Before he packed up their life in the city and moved to this small town where no one knew his name or his reputation. Before he decided that being Emma's father was the only title that mattered anymore. Emma Hayes was pure sunshine wrapped in a 6-year-old body, with her mother's golden curls and her father's determined chin. She possessed that rare quality of children who've known loss early, an ability to find joy in small moments while carrying a wisdom beyond her years. Every night, she still set 3 plates at their small dinner table, and every night, Jackson gently put the third one away. She talked to everyone with earnest enthusiasm, as if each person might become the family she desperately wished to grow. Grace Bennett had been raised in marble halls and crystal chandeliers. The only daughter of Richard Bennett, CEO of Bennett Corporation, a multi-billion-dollar empire built on 3 generations of ruthless ambition. The car accident, 2 years ago, had taken her ability to walk, but not her spirit, at least not at first. She'd fought through months of physical therapy, learned to navigate the world from her wheelchair, even tried to maintain her relationship with Derek, her father's hand-picked fiancé. But Derek had stayed only as long as he thought her legs might heal. When doctors confirmed the paralysis was permanent, he'd made his disgust clear. Her father, more concerned about a canceled merger than his daughter's broken heart, had given her an ultimatum: marry Derek anyway, or leave. She chose to leave. Richard Bennett ruled his boardrooms the way generals commanded armies, with precision, calculation, and an iron fist that never trembled. At 58, his hair had gone silver, but his ambition remained black and white. He'd built his empire on the principle that emotion was weakness, that love was a luxury successful men couldn't afford. His daughter had been part of his grand design, beautiful, intelligent, the perfect piece to secure the Morrison partnership through marriage to their heir. The accident had complicated things, but business was about adapting to complications. When Grace refused to adapt, when she chose her dignity over his deals, he'd done what he always did with faulty investments: cut his losses. Yet even as she'd wheeled herself out of his mansion, he'd already assigned Carter, his most trusted bodyguard, to shadow her. Because beneath all that ice, in a place he'd never admit existed, Richard Bennett loved his daughter. He just didn't know how to choose her over his empire. Derek Morrison, 28, heir to Morrison Technologies, had the kind of face that graced magazine covers, and the kind of soul that belonged in bankruptcy court, morally speaking. He'd pursued Grace when she could dance at galas, when she could ski in Aspen, when she could be the perfect trophy wife to complement his perfect life. The wheelchair had ruined the aesthetic. "I can't be seen pushing you around for the rest of my life," he'd told her that very morning, his voice as casual as if declining a dinner invitation. What would people think? Besides, damaged goods don't increase in value over time. He'd actually smiled when he said it, that practiced smile he used in board meetings, when delivering bad news to investors. Carter, the bodyguard, was a ghost in a black suit. 43 years old, with 19 years of military service that had taught him to be invisible when needed, he'd protected Richard Bennett for 7 years, had watched Grace grow from a teenager into a woman, had been there the night of her accident. Now he sat in a rental car, 50 yards from the bus stop, heater running, phone ready to call for backup if needed. His orders were clear: Follow her. Protect her. Don't let her see you. But as he watched the stranger in the pickup truck approach her, as he saw her lift her eyes with something that looked like hope, Carter made a decision that would later change everything. He chose to watch, to wait, to let this moment unfold. Sometimes, he thought, protection meant knowing when not to interfere. The drive to Jackson's house took them through quiet streets where snow muffled every sound except Emma's excited chatter. The little girl had immediately taken charge of the conversation, telling Grace about her favorite books, her drawings, the cat that sometimes visited their backyard, but wouldn't let anyone pet it. "Do you like hot chocolate?" Emma asked, turning around in her seat to face Grace. "Daddy makes the best hot chocolate. He puts tiny marshmallows in it, and sometimes, if I've been really good, he adds whipped cream too." Grace found herself nodding, though she couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked her such a simple, caring question. Jackson's house sat at the end of Oak Avenue, a small wooden structure that had seen better decades but wore its age with dignity. The porch sagged slightly on the left side, and the blue paint was peeling near the windows, but the path to the door had been carefully shoveled, and warm yellow light spilled from every window like promises of safety. As Jackson carried Grace up the 3 steps, she weighed almost nothing. Like a bird with hollow bones, she caught the scent of something cooking inside. Soup, maybe, or stew. Something that took time and care to make right. Emma ran ahead, throwing open the door and announcing to the empty house, "We have company. We have a friend." She grabbed Grace's wheelchair from Jackson and struggled to pull it up the steps, determined to help. Inside, the house revealed itself in humble honesty. Mismatched furniture that had been carefully maintained. Walls covered with Emma's drawings. A small Christmas tree in the corner, even though it was still early December. Everything spoke of a life built around love rather than money, function rather than form. "This is the living room," Emma said, taking her role as tour guide seriously. "That's Daddy's chair, but he'll let you sit in it if you want. It's the most comfortable, and this is where I do my homework. And that's where we read stories before bed." She pointed to each area, as if showing off treasures in a palace. To her, they were. The kitchen was small but clean, with dishes drying in a rack by the sink and a pot simmering on the stove. Jackson settled Grace at the small round table, its surface marked with years of meals and homework sessions. Emma immediately pulled her chair closer to Grace's wheelchair. "You can sit next to me," she announced. "This can be your spot from now on." Dinner was chicken soup with thick chunks of vegetables and homemade bread that Jackson apologized for, saying it hadn't risen quite right. But to Grace, who'd eaten at 5-star restaurants across 3 continents, it tasted like belonging. Emma carefully placed a mug of warm milk in front of her, using both hands to make sure she didn't spill. "I warmed it up just right," she said proudly. "Not too hot, not too cold. Daddy taught me how to test it with my pinky finger." That small gesture, a child's careful attention, the sweet warmth of milk given freely, broke something inside Grace. Tears came suddenly, quietly, rolling down her cheeks as she sat at this stranger's table. For 2 years since her accident, people had treated her like she was broken, fragile, a problem to be managed or avoided. But here, in this small kitchen with its worn linoleum and ancient refrigerator that hummed too loudly, she was just Grace, just a person having dinner with 2 other people who seemed to see her rather than her wheelchair. Jackson pretended not to notice her tears, busying himself with serving seconds to Emma, who was telling a long story about her friend Madison at school, who could whistle through her nose. But his awareness filled the room like a protective shield, giving Grace space to feel without judgment or intrusion. This was what his wife Sarah had taught him. Sometimes the greatest kindness was allowing someone their emotions without trying to fix them. As the evening settled around them like a comfortable blanket, Emma yawned widely, then tried to hide it. "I'm not tired," she insisted, even as her eyes drooped. Jackson scooped her up, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, then looked over his shoulder at Grace. "You'll be here tomorrow, right?" she asked sleepily. "You'll be here when I wake up?" Grace looked at Jackson, who nodded slightly. Yes, she told Emma. I'll be here. After Emma was tucked in, Jackson returned to find Grace sitting by the window, watching the snow fall in the circle of light from the street lamp. Thank you, she said, without looking at him. You didn't have to. Everyone needs somewhere to be, Jackson interrupted gently. Sometimes home isn't a place you come from. Sometimes it's a place you find. The yellow light from the old lamp in the corner cast everything in gold, transforming the modest room into something that felt almost magical. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the tracks that had led Grace here, as if the universe itself was saying, "This is where you start again." On a particularly quiet evening 3 days later, after Emma had gone to bed, Grace found herself telling Jackson everything. They sat in the living room, him in his worn leather chair, her positioned where she could see both him and the window, where snow continued its endless fall. She told him about the accident on the mountain road, black ice sending their car spinning into a guardrail, the sensation of flying, then nothing. Waking up to a doctor explaining that her spinal cord had been damaged beyond repair, that she would never walk again. My fiancé held my hand through the diagnosis, she said, her voice steady but distant. Derek promised we'd face it together. That lasted exactly 4 months, the time it took for the doctors to confirm the paralysis was permanent. Yesterday morning, he looked at me across the breakfast table and said I wasn't the investment he'd signed up for. Those were his exact words. An investment. She spoke about her father, how Richard Bennett had built his empire on calculated risks and strategic partnerships, how her marriage to Derek had been another merger in his grand design. When I refused to beg to stay, when I said I wouldn't marry someone who saw me as damaged goods, my father gave me 2 hours to reconsider. When I didn't, he pointed to the door, 22 years of being his daughter, and it took him less than 5 minutes to disown me. Jackson listened without interrupting, his presence solid and patient. When she finished, the silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was contemplative, respectful of the weight of what had been shared. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying its own burden of memory. Sarah died 3 years ago, he began, the words coming slowly. Complications during routine surgery. I was in the hospital, just 50 feet away, but protocol wouldn't let me in the operating room. I stood outside those doors for 6 hours, watching through that little window as they tried to save her. I knew before they came out to tell me you can see it in their movements, when they stop trying so hard, when urgency becomes ritual. He paused, his hand absently rubbing the arm of his chair. I was one of the best thoracic surgeons in the state. Had published papers, pioneered techniques, saved hundreds of lives, but I couldn't save hers. Couldn't even try. The next week, I resigned, sold our house in the city, packed up Emma, and came here where no one knew who I was or what I'd lost. Emma was only 3. She still asks sometimes if Mommy's coming back from her long trip. The weight of shared loss filled the room, but somehow it didn't feel heavy. It felt like understanding. Emma's voice suddenly piped up from the hallway she'd been listening, though neither adult had noticed her small figure in the shadows. Mommy's not coming back, Emma said, padding into the room in her pajamas with the little pandas on them. But that's okay, because she sent us Grace instead. She climbed onto her father's lap, then reached out her hand toward Grace. Right, Daddy? Sometimes people leave so other people can come. The innocent wisdom of her words hung in the air. Jackson pulled his daughter close, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Maybe you're right, sweetheart, he said softly. Emma looked at Grace with those serious eyes children get when they're about to say something important. If you stay here, I promise I'll never let you be sad alone. When you're sad, I'll be sad with you. And when you're happy, I'll be happy with you. That's what family does. Neither adult could speak for a moment. Finally, Grace wheeled herself closer to them, close enough that Emma could reach out and take her hand. I'd like that, Grace whispered. I'd like that very much. The black Range Rover arrived on a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after Grace had come to stay. It pulled up to the curb with deliberate precision. Richard Bennett stepped out, his charcoal suit immaculate despite the slushy streets, followed by two men who could only be bodyguards. Emma was at school, and Grace was in the kitchen when she saw them through the window. Her hands began to shake. Jackson answered the door before they could knock, positioning himself firmly in the doorway. Richard Bennett's eyes were the color of winter steel, and they assessed Jackson with the same calculating gaze he used on business opponents. "You're harboring my daughter," he said without preamble. "Whatever game you're playing, whatever you think you'll gain from this, it ends now." "She's not being harbored," Jackson replied calmly. "She's a guest who's welcome to stay as long as she chooses." Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My daughter doesn't belong here, living like this. She's coming home where she can receive proper care, the kind of care that threw her out for refusing to marry someone who called her damaged goods." Jackson's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the calm. Grace wheeled herself into view behind Jackson. "I'm not coming back, Father." Richard's jaw tightened. "Don't be ridiculous. You're being emotional. You need to think about your future, about the family's reputation." "I am thinking about my future," Grace interrupted, her voice stronger than she felt. "For the first time, I'm actually thinking about what I want, not what you want." The standoff lasted several long seconds. One of the bodyguards shifted slightly, and Jackson's stance subtly adjusted in response, not threatening, but clearly ready. Richard noticed, his eyes narrowing as he reassessed the man in front of him. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Richard said quietly, dangerously. "I could destroy you with one phone call. Your little house, whatever job you have, your daughter's future, I could take it all away." Emma's voice suddenly rang out from behind them all. She'd come home early from school with a stomachache, the school nurse driving her back. She pushed past everyone to wrap her arms around Grace's waist. "Don't let him take her, Daddy," she said, her young voice fierce with protective love. "Grace belongs with us now." Something flickered in Richard's eyes as he watched his daughter's hand gently smooth Emma's hair. For just a moment, the CEO facade cracked, and a father's pain showed through, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by cold fury. "You have 24 hours to send her home," he said to Jackson. "After that, I'll use every resource at my disposal to get her back." He turned and walked back to his car, the bodyguards following. But just before getting in, he looked back at Grace one more time. In that glance was something complex anger. Yes, but also bewilderment. As if he couldn't understand how his perfectly controlled world had suddenly spiraled beyond his grasp. After they drove away, Emma was still clinging to Grace, her small body trembling. "I won't let him take you," she whispered fiercely. Grace pulled the little girl onto her lap, holding her close. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." That night, none of them slept well. But when morning came and they sat around the small kitchen table, Emma's hand in Grace's and Jackson's steady presence, anchoring them all, they felt something that Richard Bennett, with all his billions, couldn't buy. They felt like family. The business news exploded 3 days later. Bennett Corporation stock plummets as Morrison partnership dissolves. The headlines were brutal. The Morrison family had publicly withdrawn from the merger, citing irreconcilable differences in corporate vision. But everyone in the business world knew the truth. No wedding meant no deal. 20% of Bennett Corporation's value evaporated in a single morning of trading. Grace saw it on the small television in Jackson's living room while Emma was at school. The news showed her father leaving his office, surrounded by reporters shouting questions. He looked older than she'd ever seen him, his silver hair somehow less distinguished, more gray. His shoulders, always squared in perfect confidence, seemed to carry a weight that threatened to bend them. "My father built that company from nothing," she whispered, her fingers gripping the arms of her wheelchair. "His father before him. And now, because of me, Not because of you, Jackson said firmly, sitting down beside her. Because of choices. His choice to tie business to your personal life. Derek's choice to be a coward. Your choice to have dignity. Don't take responsibility for other people's decisions. The phone rang an unknown number. Grace answered with trembling fingers. It was Davidson, her father's CFO. A man she'd known since childhood. Grace, we're in crisis mode here. The board is calling for your father's resignation. The Morrison deal was supposed to secure funding for the new medical technology division. Without it, we're looking at laying off 3,000 employees. She hung up, feeling sick. 3,000 families would suffer because she'd refused to marry a man who saw her as property. But then Jackson said something that changed everything. Medical technology division? He stood up slowly, his mind clearly working. What kind of medical technology? Grace explained what she knew. Her father's company had acquired a smaller firm developing revolutionary surgical assistance systems, AI-guided precision tools that could change how complex operations were performed, but they'd hit a wall. The technology was brilliant but impractical. Designed by engineers who didn't understand the reality of operating rooms. They needed medical expertise to make it viable, and the expert they'd hired had just quit. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked to his bedroom and returned with a box he pulled from the closet. Inside were medical journals, awards, photographs of him in surgical scrubs standing next to grateful patients. One plaque read, Dr. Jackson Hayes, pioneer in minimally invasive cardiac surgery. You're him, Grace breathed. You're the Dr. Hayes, the one who developed the Hayes method. We studied your techniques in biomedical engineering. My father tried to recruit you 3 years ago, but you disappeared. I didn't disappear. Jackson corrected quietly. I just became someone else, a father instead of a surgeon. But maybe I can be both. That night, after Emma was asleep, Jackson composed an email to Richard Bennett. It was brief, professional, and contained an attachment, his medical credentials, and a preliminary analysis of what was wrong with their medical technology project. He could fix it, he wrote. He had the expertise they desperately needed. But there were conditions. I work as a consultant, not an employee. I work from here, not in your offices. And most importantly, Grace is treated with the respect she deserves as a human being and your daughter. Not as a business asset. He showed it to Grace before sending. She read it 3 times, tears rolling down her cheeks. You don't have to do this, she said. You don't have to save him. I'm not saving him, Jackson replied. I'm saving 3,000 jobs. And maybe, just maybe, I'm saving a father from losing his daughter forever. He hit send. Within 10 minutes, his phone rang. Richard Bennett's voice was controlled, but desperate. How soon can you start? The revelation of Jackson's identity sent shockwaves through both their small household and Bennett Corporation. Within 48 hours, Jackson was reviewing technical specifications, identifying fatal flaws in design philosophy that only someone with his surgical experience could spot. He worked from his kitchen table, transforming it into a makeshift command center. Emma helped by bringing him coffee, mostly warm milk with a splash of coffee, but he drank it gratefully. Grace served as an unexpected bridge, her engineering background allowing her to translate between Jackson's medical insights and the technical team's capabilities. The first meeting with Richard Bennett was scheduled for the following Monday at Bennett Corporation headquarters. Jackson insisted Grace come with him. Richard's office occupied the entire 40th floor, with windows overlooking the city like a king surveying his kingdom. But the king looked haggard, diminished. Dr. Hayes. Richard stood as they entered, his voice formal. His eyes flickered to Grace, something unreadable passing across his face. I've reviewed your preliminary notes. If you can deliver even half of what you're proposing, you'll save this company. I can deliver all of it. Jackson replied. But we need to be clear about terms. I'm not here to save your company, Mr. Bennett. I'm here because the technology you're developing could save lives, thousands of them. And I'm here because your daughter believes, despite everything, that you're worth saving too. Richard's composure cracked. My daughter. He started, then stopped, looking at Grace directly for the first time. You look well, he said stiffly. I am well, Grace replied, her chin raised. Living with people who see me as a person tends to have that effect. The tension in the room was palpable. Then Jackson did something unexpected. He pulled out a tablet, showing a design modification. Grace actually solved one of your biggest problems, the articulation issue with the robotic assistance arm. She figured out the mathematics behind the range of motion limitation. Richard looked at his daughter with genuine surprise. You did this? She's brilliant, Jackson said simply. You just never noticed because you were too busy trying to package her for someone else's benefit. The meeting proceeded with professional efficiency, but the undercurrents were impossible to ignore. Richard kept stealing glances at his daughter, seeing her animated and engaged in a way he hadn't witnessed in years. When the board meeting was scheduled for that Friday, the entire future of Bennett Corporation hanging in the balance, Richard did something he'd never done before. He asked Grace to attend. Not as my daughter, he said carefully. As a consultant. You've contributed to the solution. You should be there. The boardroom was filled with 40 of the most powerful people in the industry, most of them ready to demand Richard's resignation. The presentation was crucial. Prove the medical technology could be saved, or watch the empire crumble. Jackson presented with the same precision he'd once used in surgery, laying out exactly how they would transform the failing project into a revolutionary success. But halfway through, he stopped. I need to be clear about something, Jackson said, looking directly at the board members. I'm not doing this for him. He gestured to Richard. I'm doing it for her. He pointed to Grace, because she's shown me that sometimes the best innovations come from people who've been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed as broken. Then Grace spoke, her voice carrying across the silent room. My father taught me that business is about seeing opportunities others miss, but he missed the biggest opportunity of all, the chance to see people as more than assets. I spent my whole life trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect investment for his empire. It took being paralyzed, abandoned, and disowned to realize that I was never broken. The only thing broken was a system that measures human worth by market value. She turned to her father, tears streaming down her face, but her voice steady. I don't want your money. I don't want your empire. I just wanted you to see me, to value me, to love me more than you love this. She gestured around the opulent boardroom. Richard stood slowly, his legendary composure finally, completely shattered. You think I don't love you? His voice broke. Everything I built was for you. Every deal, every merger, every acquisition, I was building a kingdom for my princess. I never wanted a kingdom, Grace replied. I just wanted a father. The boardroom was silent, 40 of the most powerful people in business witnessing something none of them had ever seen. Raw, honest emotion. Richard walked around the table to his daughter, then did something that would become legend in corporate circles. He knelt beside her wheelchair, taking her hands in his. I failed you, he said simply. Not as a CEO, as a father. I measured everything in profit and loss, and I lost the only profit that truly mattered. Your happiness. Emma, who had been sitting quietly in the corner where Jackson had placed her with a coloring book, suddenly spoke up. My daddy says sorry isn't just words. It's what you do after. The innocent wisdom of the child broke the tension. Several board members actually smiled. Richard looked at the little girl, then at Jackson, then back at his daughter. She's right, sorry isn't enough. But if you'll let me, I'd like to learn how to be the father you deserved from the beginning. The board voted unanimously to retain Richard as CEO, contingent on Jackson's continued involvement in the medical project. But more importantly, in that moment, watching her father's eyes fill with tears he'd probably never shed in his adult life, Grace felt something heal that had been broken far longer than her legs. Winter deepened, bringing the kind of snow that transformed the world into something clean and new. The medical project progressed ahead of schedule, but more importantly, in the small house on Oak Avenue, 3 people were learning how to be a family. Grace had started physical therapy again, not because anyone expected her to walk, but because she wanted to be stronger for herself. Jackson watched her work with the therapist, saw her determination, and fell in love with her courage all over again each day. Emma had taken to calling Grace her person at school, telling everyone about how smart Grace was, how she could solve any math problem, how she made the best French toast on Sunday mornings. The wheelchair had become just another fact of their lives, like Jackson being tall, or Emma having curly hair present, but not defining. They developed routines, Emma reading to Grace while she did her exercises, Grace helping with homework while Jackson cooked, all 3 of them watching movies on Friday nights, Emma inevitably falling asleep between them on the couch. One evening, after a particularly challenging therapy session, Grace managed to stand for 7 seconds using the parallel bars. It wasn't walking, might never be walking, but it was something. Jackson was there to catch her when her strength gave out, holding her against him as she cried from exhaustion and joy. "I'm proud of you," he whispered into her hair. "Not because you stood, but because you tried." "I want to be more," she said against his chest. "For you, for Emma." He pulled back to look at her. "You're already everything, just as you are." That night, after Emma was in bed, they sat on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets, watching stars appear between clouds. "I'm in love with you," Jackson said simply. "I didn't plan it, didn't expect it. Certainly didn't think I was ready for it. But Emma's right. You're family now. More than family. You're home." Grace reached for his hand. "I loved you from the moment you said, 'Come with me' at that bus stop. No questions, no conditions. Just an offer of shelter from someone who knew what storms looked like." They kissed then, soft and sure, a promise of tomorrows that wouldn't be perfect, but would be theirs. Inside, Emma watched from her bedroom window and smiled. Her Christmas wish was already coming true. Meanwhile, Richard Bennett sat in his empty mansion, staring at reports he couldn't focus on. His empire was recovering, stock prices stabilizing, the medical project promising revolutionary returns. But for the first time in his life, success felt hollow. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through old photos. Grace as a child on his shoulders, her college graduation, her smile before the accident. When had he stopped seeing that smile? One evening, Jackson overheard Richard on a phone call, discussing potentially revisiting the Morrison deal. The CEO was still playing chess, still moving pieces, still seeing people as pawns. Jackson felt his blood turn cold. He couldn't be part of this manipulation. That night, after everyone was asleep, Jackson began packing. But when he came downstairs with his suitcase, Grace was sitting in the living room as if she'd been waiting. "You heard him," she said. "It wasn't a question. You knew he's my father. I know all his voices, his real one, his CEO one, and his performance one." That was performance. She wheeled closer to him. "You're leaving. Sophie and I," he started, but his voice caught. "Take me with you," Grace said suddenly. "Please. I can't go back to that world. But I can't lose this either. I can't lose Emma. I can't lose you." Before Jackson could respond, Emma appeared in her pajamas, rubbing sleepy eyes. "Why are you packing, Daddy?" Jackson knelt beside his daughter. "Would you be okay with that? Going somewhere new?" Emma looked at Grace, then back at her father. "Only if Grace comes. She's family now. Families don't leave each other." The simple truth of it broke Jackson's heart. But as he stood to embrace them both, the door opened. Richard walked in without knocking, his face hard. "Going somewhere?" The confrontation that followed was quiet but devastating. "You think you can just take my daughter and disappear?" "I think," Jackson said steadily, That your daughter is an adult who can make her own choices. Richard laughed bitterly. Control? I'm trying to protect her. You think love is enough? Love doesn't pay for medical care. Love doesn't provide security. No, Emma piped up, her young voice cutting through the tension. But love makes all those things worth having. Richard looked at the child, something flickering in his eyes. What would you know about it? I know that Daddy was really sad after Mommy went to heaven, and Grace was really sad when she came here. But now they're happy because we love each other. Money can't buy happy. The innocent honesty seemed to deflate Richard. He sat down heavily on Jackson's worn couch, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. I don't know how to love without controlling, he admitted quietly. My father taught me that love was weakness, that the only way to protect what you care about is to own it completely. Your father was wrong, Jackson said simply. The only way to protect what you love is to give it freedom to choose you back. Richard looked at his daughter. And you choose this? This small house? This simple life? This man who can't give you anything close to what you were born into? He gives me something you never could, Grace replied. He gives me the freedom to be myself. Broken legs and all. Richard stood to leave, but at the door he turned back. The medical project? I'll finish it, Jackson said. Not for you, but because it will save lives. Richard nodded slowly. And Grace? I'm staying here, she said firmly. This is my home now. As Richard walked to his car, Carter emerged from the shadows. Sir, should I continue surveillance? Richard looked back at the small house where warm light spilled from the windows. No, he said quietly. Let them be. Christmas morning arrived with a gentle snowfall that made the world look like a snow globe. The small house on Oak Avenue had never looked more beautiful, with lights twinkling through the frost-covered windows. Inside, Emma was already awake, bouncing with excitement but trying to be quiet. Grace was already awake too, sitting by the tree they'd decorated together, watching the snowfall. Merry Christmas, sweetheart, she said as Emma padded over in her footy pajamas. Merry Christmas, Grace. Emma climbed carefully into her lap. Is it okay if I call you Mom? Not replacing my first mommy, but like a bonus mommy? Grace's throat tightened with emotion. I would be honored to be your bonus mom. Jackson appeared with coffee and hot chocolate, having heard the exchange. He kissed Emma's head, then Grace's a gesture so natural it seemed they'd been doing this dance for years instead of months. Merry Christmas, my loves. The doorbell rang, unexpected on Christmas morning. Jackson opened it to find Richard standing there, no bodyguards, no CEO armor, just a father holding wrapped presents and looking uncertain. I know I should have called, he began. Grandpa, Emma shouted, a title she'd decided on herself. You came? Come see what Santa brought. Richard looked at his daughter, seeking permission. Grace nodded, smiling. Come in, Dad. Emma made you a stocking. They spent the morning like any family might, opening presents, Emma shrieking with delight over each one. Richard had brought thoughtful presents, not expensive, just thoughtful. A medical text Jackson had mentioned wanting, art supplies for Emma and for Grace, a photo album filled with pictures from her childhood. Each one annotated, in his careful handwriting, with memories he'd never shared before. I didn't know you kept all these, Grace said softly, running her fingers over a photo of herself at age 5, covered in finger paint and grinning. I kept everything, Richard admitted. I just forgot to keep you. After lunch, they all went outside. Emma made snow angels while the adults watched. Then, without warning, Grace said, I want to try something. With Jackson on one side and her father on the other, she stood from her chair, not for 7 seconds this time, but for nearly 30. When she finally sat back down, exhausted but triumphant. Both men had tears in their eyes. You're amazing, Richard said, his voice thick with pride. I'm trying, Grace replied. That's all any of us can do. As the day wore on, Emma fell asleep on the couch, worn out from excitement. The 3 adults sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire Jackson had built. Finally, Richard stood to leave. "Thank you," he said simply, "for letting me in, for giving me another chance." "Everyone deserves another chance," Jackson replied. "Even CEOs." Richard laughed a real laugh, especially ones who are learning to be fathers first. At the door, he turned back to his daughter. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not for standing, not for the engineering work, not for any achievement, just for being you, for having the courage to choose happiness over expectation." After he left, Grace and Jackson sat together on the couch, Emma between them, watching snow continue to fall. "This is what I wanted," Grace said softly. "Not perfection, just this. Family, love, the chance to matter not for what I can do, but for who I am." Jackson pulled her closer. "You've always mattered. From the moment I saw you at that bus stop, you mattered. Come with me," she quoted back to him, smiling. 3 words that changed everything. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. But inside the small house on Oak Avenue, there was warmth and light and love. 3 broken people who'd found wholeness in each other, and a father who'd learned that empires mean nothing compared to the kingdom of a child's heart. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether Grace would walk again, whether the foundation would succeed, whether Richard would continue to choose love over control. But sitting there in the glow of Christmas lights, with Emma's soft breathing and the crackle of the fire, they had everything that mattered. They had each other, they had forgiveness, they had hope, and sometimes that's all the happy ending anyone needs. Not a destination, but a journey. Not perfection, but progress.